Nick.
Yes.
What's your topic?
I've been watching a lot of I've been reading a lot of DC comics lately.
Yeah, you have, man.
Largely because I think you guys are rubbing off on me. Playing a lot of PS4, reading a lot of DC comics. That's the
Talking about getting a Vita.
It's the kind of funny way. Thinking about getting a Vita. Someone actually offered if I got a Vita, they said they'd buy me Persona Dancing All Night.
Yeah.
Did I get that correct? Yeah. Which sounds like something that I thoroughly would not enjoy, but I'll give it a shot because I'm open to everything.
Thank you.
Including taking Kevin to Disneyland with me, which I'm sure would be, again, 50-50 pro and con.
You literally have different numbers 10 seconds ago.
All right, 70-30. But one of the things I've noticed is that DC is like Marvel, they're great storytellers, right? And I think they tend to be a little bit better in the storytelling on the comic side than they are on the motion picture side for now, and that could change. We'll see. We're seeing them ramp up their universe, their cinematic universe. But one of the things I thought they've always excelled at is their animated universe.
Oh yeah,
and they put out maybe, I want to say mainstream movies because they do all like the Lego tie-in movies and things like that. But I want to say that they put out maybe 1-2 really quality animated films from different studios every year.
Yeah.
Most notably, the one I just watched was Justice League Gods and Monsters.
And it's good. I haven't watched it yet.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
What is it?
It's a different take on Justice League.
But done by Bruce Timm, though.
Done by Bruce Timm. Where instead of Jor-El being the father, Zod is the father of Superman. So like there's a little switcheroo last minute, and so Superman is before he gets sent
switcheroo.
out. I mean that's literally what it is. Okay. You haven't seen it yet.
No, I've read the comics prequel.
There you go.
So I can tell you all about it. I can tell you all about what's happening.
So the idea is on the planet, the Justice League is not the Justice League that we know. It's not Bruce Wayne. It's not Diana Troy. Is that her last name?
Prince.
Who's Diana Troy?
You're thinking of Donna Troy, Wonder Girl. The original Wonder Girl. Not, of course, the new Wonder Girl that fucked Superboy before they blinked out continuity.
Instead, it's a whole different host of people. Now they are still crime fighters, but they're like brutal.
But they all have different, like their whole thing. Yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing. Like Batman is actually it's Man Bat, but even in a different way where he's got to suck blood. He's a vampire. He's doing all this stuff. Superman, when he comes and he lands in like Mexico. His parents bring him across the border to be a migrant worker.
Right.
So he's got this huge chip on his shoulder, and like he feels like even more of an outcast and outsider.
Right. He also says the word Dios mío a couple times.
Because, again, now he's been raised in Mexico.
Which I originally didn't remember because they gloss over it at the beginning of the film.
That's why I had to read these prequel comics.
Right. And so I was like, that's an interesting turn of phrase for Superman to say.
Ay, Dios mío.
He literally sees someone. He sees like a dead body. He's like, Dios mío.
And you're like,
Te amo, baby, te amo. And I'm like, whoa, what? Superman's trying to seduce me with his mouth words. But it's cool because it's an interesting take, and it's super violent. I mean, it's really violent. People die. You see a lot of blood. They've been able to go a little more rated R with this.
Yeah.
It may still have a PG-13 rating. I don't know. I don't really understand ratings anymore.
Yeah, they get away with a lot.
But my question is, where do you guys land on this? And what are you into the animated realm when it comes to DC? And why is it that they can make great animated films and tell great stories of the comics, but they've had such a hard time transitioning that over to film?
Well, animation is so much more close to comics than live action. So I feel like that's the easy answer. It's hard to make that stuff in real life, but a cartoon, cartoons and comics are essentially the same thing, but one's in motion, So it's like...
But, okay, so backing up to that, why is it okay for them to make an animated movie where Superman is the son of Zod? But they can't do that. They can't take that risk or that liability with a cinematic
because it's the
universe.
audience it's aimed at. Like everyone here, when you said instead of Jor-El, it's Zod, we get that. We understand that at a base level, whereas a mainstream audience doesn't. And that's why they burn so much time with these movies where they have to come out and set up who they are and tell the origin and do this to over-explain who this character is. Because a gajillion people who have never even heard of Zod are going to go see that film and get introduced to that character in Man of Steel and understand what that is to an extent. The animated series, they're able to go out and take these shots because they're building them for an audience that is either still reading comics or was into comics and understands that. I don't think, and I don't have the financials, but the mainstream audience, I don't think are downloading these movies and checking them out or buying them off the shelves and coming back and be like, what is going on?
I mean, they're not. If you go to a Best Buy, these movies maybe a month after they come out are like essentially being given away. Like they're the bargain bin stuff for sure.
Sure, but at the same token, if we're constantly being forced to retell origin stories every 5 years, every time we put something out, then doesn't that rationale, by that same rationale, can't we just tell any story at that point?
Yeah, no. Don't get me. I'm with you that it's a huge fucking problem that they don't have a way around it yet.
Like,
and
if
the fact
people
that
don't know the origins of Spider-Man at this point, they're never going to get it.
I mean,
They're never gonna
Spider-Man's
know.
the one real, example of that happening now. That's
Well,
just
Batman
ridiculous.
now. We're going to
But
get a third retelling of Batman where
But
he's
it's
at.
really,
I'm sure they're
are
going to have
you?
to be like,
They're gonna show, yeah. I mean, we already saw it in the trailer, the
his
slow
parents
motion
died.
gun. But I really
shit.
feel like that's a
different than an
flashback. That's a
origin story,
flashback.
though.
Yeah, exactly.
Like just making a nod to like what happened in
This feels like the first time where
they're
they're really doing something in the movie. In Batman v Superman, where it's like, time's passed. He's an old Batman. We're giving you something different. You know what I mean? And the same thing with the Jason Todd Joker theory we kicked around the show last week, 2 weeks ago. Like, there's that thing to it of like, shit, maybe they're actually going to treat us with that modicum of respect that you can get around and do something. But what's always fascinating about this when we talk about this in these animated universes, and I mean, we're talking about Bruce Timm right here in particular, right? Is like what we love Avengers and Marvel's cinematic universe for, and what we're hoping doesn't go wrong with DC's in this, is what DC's been doing when they were on TV, right? It was Batman the Animated Series, and it was Superman the Animated Series, and they were in the same universe, and then it was Justice League, and then it was Justice League Unlimited, and they kept building up on these things to where it was, you suddenly...
a universe.
You had Hawk and Dove getting fucking episodes of their own, and you're like, what the fuck? Who cares about this?
I care about Hawk and Dove.
You're stupid.
I care about Hawk
They
and
got
Dove.
their own episodes, and they had their own things, and we fleshed
That was
this thing
Justice
out.
League
And so-
Unlimited, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's how it got to at the point where they were like, well, hell, put everybody in there and let's actually tell these things. And
Right.
we're preaching to the choir here again. Like, I don't think Justice League Unlimited's hitting on people who, I've never cared about a comic before, but this Hawk and Dove, yes, let me watch you know what I mean? Like, then you get to the point where you've told all of that stuff and you have an audience that understands it. So yeah, now let's go out there and make Gods and Monsters. Let's go out there and give adult takes in quotes on, what these people are, and tell stories that are in an animated form. That Under the Red Hood's a great story, but does anyone want to see a Batman movie that relies so hard on this Jason Todd storyline? You know what I mean? That do they understand what that is? And
Yeah, but I would, right? I mean,
Yeah,
isn't that,
no.
and that's the thing, I think. So is your feeling now that there's a little bit of a shift happening where they are trusting that audiences can kind of either figure it out, and or the relevancy of those origin stories doesn't quite matter as much as
you
it
hope.
used to?
I mean, that's what you hope with these universes, right? And the big test is going to be when, Robert Downey Jr. doesn't want to be Iron Man anymore, and
or
when
Hugh Jackman doesn't want to be Wolverine
exactly,
anymore, which
like
is already
what do you
expressed
do
he
when
doesn't
you
want
put a
to.
new character in there, and how are you explaining that, or what are they going to do, and how are they going to work with that, or do they eventually just blink out the universe? I mean, I feel like X-Men's still tumbling towards that. It's all going to be rebooted. At some point, I feel Marvel's going to get the licensing rights back, and they're going to bring them into the universe, and they're not going to...
just like Spider-Man. And like that's the issue with Spider-Man is it didn't need to be rebooted the last time it was.
Yeah.
Like that they messed up real bad giving him another origin story and all that shit. They should have just kept giving Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Because now him being rebooted now feels super weird and wrong. But it's not that they need to reboot Spider-Man now. It's that because of the universe it's in, they need to retrofit him in somehow, which means he has to have an origin story. Spider-Man couldn't have just been doing shit while the Avengers and all this shit was happening. So it's like we're forced into a reboot for Spider-Man because of the MCU.
Right.
Whereas last time we weren't with Spider-Man. I think Marvel is where this all kind of gets really interesting because how come they haven't had good animated movies?
I feel like it's because they didn't have the base that DC did, where it was, here's this awesome Batman series, here's this awesome Superman series, here's this awesome Justice League, and now...
But I mean, it's like in the 90s, they weren't all the same. I mean, I guess they were the same universe, like X-Men and Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. That was in the X-Men universe?
Yeah, there
Oh,
was
yeah.
like a whole like big crossover series and
remember that one.
Fantastic Four.
At least it was in the animated series.
That's
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Like
Spider-Man was
so
on
all
it.
the 90s animated
Sorry,
shows
I
were...
thought you guys were talking about comics. Obviously, the comics was the same. But yeah, in the original X-Men, yeah, Spider-Man gets caught in the mansion and all that stuff.
and
Cool.
Fantastic Four
That's
as
awesome.
well. So
That's
it's like, but then they've never had success, and those shows were
But like,
successes.
and so that, and now this is going to sound like a normal DC swipe at Marvel, and I don't mean it to be, but could it be said that the reason that doesn't have the relevancy and that keep going is the fact that I've always felt like Marvel cartoons are cartoons for kids, and DC cartoons could be for kids, but they could be for adults. Like the themes of animated series, Batman the animated series was wrestling with and doing things. Like when there's the Batman cyborg who's wrestling with he's really Batman, like the Dreamscape episode and all these different things. Like there's themes in there that I still want them to put that on Netflix because I'd love to watch that start to finish.
I mean, I
I'd
feel like
love that.
with the
Is that not on
X-Men,
Netflix yet?
No.
X-Men had stuff like that too, and Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, maybe not.
Spider-Man
so much. That one
did?
wasn't- Yeah,
Like I watched Spider-Man and I loved Spider-Man. I had all the action figures. I don't feel like Spider-Man was on that level of storytelling.
It definitely wasn't on that level. I mean,
Okay.
you were right. The DC 90s cartoons overall get the edge over the Marvel for sure. But it's not like the Marvel are that much lower.
Sure,
It's not like
okay.
it's modern stuff where a lot of the stuff is kids shit.
Yeah.
Like the 90s stuff.
And I feel like that's where they've separated here, especially, right? Is the fact that Marvel is still making kids shit, where DC is like, here's this. Oh, we love
Gods and Monsters is not a kid's.
We love that awesome
Animated
Jeff
movie.
Johns Brainiac run. Let's put it out as this Superman movie. Oh,
Dark Knight Returns.
Dark Knight Returns. Let's put that out as a thing.
That's definitely not a kid's movie.
I think you guys are overlooking, some you've talked about it. You're not, you're implying it. Maybe you're not explicitly saying it, which is, when I flirted with comics in 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, when I was like really getting into that stuff, it was the Batman animated series that really was pretty seminal for me to get into Batman. I really appreciate it. And what we're not really saying, which I think is somewhat obvious, is that the Marvel cartoons, like, I never watched Fantastic Four, but I watched a lot of Spider-Man. I watched a lot of X-Men. They're very fucking crude compared to the way DC's cartoons were done, Batman and Superman, the ones I watched, in terms of animation, in terms of the way they look and the way they hold up, the writing, like all that kind of stuff. Like even at the time, I was like, these are very second rate compared to what DC's doing, And I don't know if that's a commonly held notion or something that I just saw it a different way than other people saw it. But I remember even back then, I watched Spider-Man and X-Men every day after school. And Batman was like a fucking treat, man. When Superman came out, I even watched a little bit of that too because it was the same style, looked the same. I mean, this is the Superman from it.
There was a vision with the DC cartoon.
Exactly. Like I just felt like they weren't the X-Men. It reminds me a lot of Transformers and G.I. Joe and stuff, where like you can tell that they like in hindsight they were just shipped out overseas. They were done fucking really crudely. They do not look good. Where when I look at, and they're not that, the X-Men. Don't get me wrong, X-Men and Spider-Man aren't that bad, but they're I feel like kind of similar to that. Whereas opposed to the DC ones, especially Batman, I feel like those are really fucking good. And I think that's the one thing, that's the way I feel about some of these movies today. It's almost like a common theme where I feel like I'm maybe more DC aligned just in that sense. But it was another thing too, which was that I feel like Batman and Superman were able to focus on one person and the cast of characters, like the villains, the rogues around them. Whereas opposed to X-Men and Spider-Man to a much lesser extent, Spider-Man there was a lot of Sinister Six shit in all those cartoons and weird shit like that. But there was a lot of X-Men. In other words, there was not a lot of exposition. It seemed like there wasn't a lot of reason for them to focus on one character at a time. They had to focus on a bigger group or a bigger. To me, when I watched Spider-Man, I felt like the draw was the enemies in my opinion.
Shocker.
That's how I fell in love with Shocker. That was where that joke came from. So I mean, that's just as someone who's quite ignorant on comic books. That was always my takeaway from that era because that was when I was actually engaged in comics.
Yeah. Well,
that's all I
think
have to say about the issue.
The X-Men and Spider-Man series, I think the actual style of animation was more complex. The visual styles they were going for was kind of harkening back to the 80s where they would actually try to draw characters a little more true to form with realistic features. But what that unfortunately did was it made the film, the specifically X-Men, and I think Spider-Man as well. X-Men I think ended prematurely if I remember correctly because it was just so damn expensive to create and to make. And so I think where they relied heavily on the visuals, I think that was where you saw DC step in and go, let's not make that mistake. Let's develop a visual style that is elegant and simple and that will just allow us to tell really cool stories very, very quickly and experiment because as the cheaper the series is to create, and I'm not basing this on any facts, I don't know this for sure, but the cheaper the style is to create, the easier you can bang them out and take more risks with them. And I think that's
worry more about the things that matter.
Which is the storytelling and the character development and the actual, paying attention to the acting and making sure that, and I don't know if this was a conscious decision or if this is just the environment at the time and how everything evolved and progressed, but Kevin Conroy as Batman, to me, the second he started doing that voice, I didn't even question it. He was Batman and somehow, some way is still Batman. I mean, his voice is still synonymous with Batman. Seeing it all the way through some of the animated series, I think they've branched out now and they're starting to find other talent for Batman, specifically in Gods and Monsters because it's a different character.
They shake it up and do stuff where they'll bring in Troy, they'll bring Roger Craig Smith. And they want this Batman to sound differently, but still, when it's a marquee Batman thing, they bring in Conroy.
Even now, there's they make movies that do take place in that universe.
Yeah.
In the is it called just DC animated universe, whatever?
I don't know. But I mean, Gods and Monsters, I think is specifically. I think it's supposed to be in that universe, but it's an alternate universe. But it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know
is that a weird contradiction of terms?
Yeah.
It is in that universe, but it's just an alternate telling of that story. But very same style, same character design, same characters, but it's just
a what if
that's the
tale.
Bruce Timm.
You'll go right into that, and you'll be like, this is familiar territory.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I don't
why
mean
don't
to
they
be rude, by the way. I'm watching the X-Men intro because I haven't seen it in so long. It's basically the way I remember it. It's not like I said. It's that same. It's the same spirit as the '80s stuff. It's a little bit better done, but it doesn't have that soul, man. Batman had fucking soul.
Batman had elegance to it.
It did. I really, really, really think those Batman cartoons, being quite ignorant about Batman, Still, even though I love him, I mean, that was when I really fell in love with that character, man. They're fucking those cartoons are fucking rad. This whole look, which is, you know, Superman was inspired obviously by that look of Batman.
Yeah.
Is so fucking. It's perfect.
Are you kidding me?
It's fucking perfect. I don't know. I love it. I think it looks great. I'll always have very fond memories of it.
Do you remember the Superman Batman crossover?
Yeah. Joker, the giant green, jade statue that was
Yeah.
kryptonite. Yeah.
That blew my mind.
That was awesome. That was what we had been waiting for forever, right? Yeah, that was so good.
I used to rent all the VHSs of all the Batman and Superman shit when I was a kid.
Yeah.
God, it was so
I have
good.
a quick
Nailed
question
it,
because
too.
you guys were talking about as I know, and I'm sure people that watch our show know a lot more about the stuff than I do, but X-Men and Spider-Man being kind of cast out during Marvel's problems. In other words, Sony acquired, I guess, Spider-Man. I don't know who the fuck owns X-Men. Fox. What is is it public what the deal is? In other words, is the deal in perpetuity? Like, do they forever control? Or Tim was saying, like, maybe they get them back, but, like, why would that ever happen?
They won't get it back until they sell them back.
The thing is, like, we never thought that Spider-Man would go to Marvel either.
Well, that's
I
because
did.
That's because Sony Studios is hurting right now.
yeah,
Exactly.
but
And that's how it's all going to happen, is that everybody's going to get weak and they're going to continue to see, knock on wood, depending on who you are, this juggernaut of the Marvel Cinematic Universe continue to snowball and grow. And that's when eventually Fox has to do the same thing of just like, fuck, if we could cross over, it would be, let's do Avengers versus X-Men. You know what I mean? Our X-Men versus their Avengers and blah.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you will see that. Sony is.
You will. Money makes it all go round, and that's what people see. That's the dollar signs. I think they're nice.
But what I'm hoping for, and what I would hope, is that I mean, obviously there's a lot of competition between these studios, but there's so much money to be shared in revenue.
Yeah.
That it would be. I'm sure they're talking. In fact, you know they're talking, right? They're obviously talking. They're talking about they're bringing Spider-Man back into the fold. Eventually, what you're going to see is Fox is just going to turn around and relicense those characters out to Marvel, out to Disney, because it's not uncommon, by the way. This happens all the time in TV, where in Fox television studios, they'll produce something that then goes on NBC just because maybe they don't want to actually distribute it, or NBC wants to go sell it, or vice versa, right? I think there was just a law passed. There was a law, and I don't know if it's still in place, where you had to have a certain percentage of your programming, if you owned a television network, come from outside sources, and that may have just changed. I'm not quite sure, but so it's not uncommon for Fox to have to work with someone else, and it behooves them to, because if they're making a lot of money with their X-Men cinematic, the X-Men movies that they're making, why not just then turn around and license those characters that you've built? Because I mean, like it or not, those are very popular franchises. Days of Future Past proved that it was popular. It did well. They're making Apocalypse. It looks cool. I'm gonna go see it.
well, they're making more than Apocalypse. They're making Apocalypse
that's true.
and Gambit and Deadpool. And
Well, I just mean in like the actual X-Men, like just the X-Men movies, which feel like the Avengers movies, right? That's what they're trying to go for, where they're trying to build up their own.
Deadpool is a part of the X-Men universe.
He's owned by Fox, I believe.
Yeah, that's why he was
so
in
it's
X-Men
Deadpool,
Wolverine.
X-Men, Fantastic Four. They had Daredevil, but they lost Daredevil. Back to Marvel.
They have Fantastic Four. That's useful. I'm super interested. I'm really interested to see how that one does, because that movie looks like shit.
See, I'm most interested about that movie. I have not seen a single trailer for it.
Really?
Really?
I've stayed
I'm
away
like,
from it completely just because I just want to see what happens. But I'm interested to see how they get it involved with the X-Men and like how they make that part of the
Have
universe.
they said they're going to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, but I mean,
So they're gonna have like a Fox universe.
they have to, right?
Well, they already sort of have a Fox universe. No one thinks of it in terms like that, but I mean, they've made a bunch of Fantastic Four movies already.
Well, those aren't.
Those
in
don't
it,
exist
though.
anymore, though.
No, but I
This-
mean, that's what I'm saying is though they have those two big franchises that they could. Those are two big teams. Now they're not the Avengers, but I would have argued back in the '90s that obviously to me, X-Men was way cooler and way more important and impactful
I mean-
to mainstream than the Avengers.
But that's your point is kind of being proven to a sense where it's like, yeah, the Avengers and stuff is the marquee thing because that is where that is Marvel and it is the proper canon or whatever. But it's like X-Men obviously is very successful.
yeah.
So it's
and they're
like, it
cooler.
is-
let's be honest.
It's like they're right there. You know?
I've never thought about it, but it is somewhat impressive that I think to the mainstream audience and with Marvel, typically X-Men will probably be the most visible for them. And it's amazing that Marvel, as with their cinematic universe, has done what they've done with really, I don't want to say B tier because that's not true, but like characters that maybe it is in a way, like characters that are just not as well known. It's actually somewhat impressive that they did it without Spider-Man and
Well, that's
without
the thing.
X-Men.
The
It's
most-
amazing.
The most well-known Marvel characters, Spider-Man, Wolverine, and they didn't have either of them.
And they still made it work. It's pretty impressive. But I think I see that not knowing very little about Fantastic Four. I have two questions about that we can't really answer. A is that like does anyone? I don't mean this to be disparaging, but like, does anyone like really care about Fantastic Four? Is this like a comic book that thrives and that does well? Are there people that like ride or die?
This gets into a whole other crazy can of worms because all these film rights have been like.
Oh, so they don't
between
do
the three
Fantastic
things.
Four anymore.
Marvel's been slow in its roll on the Fantastic Four comics. So it's like there's a lot of political games going on in every sense.
I would do the same
That's
thing.
why eventually they'll find a way to bridge that gap. They will. There's money to be made there. It's silly that they're those two sides of the camps. It'd be silly for those two sides of the camps not to be talking about a rev share somehow, right? It's as simple as me saying, I own the rights to Fantastic Four. Tim wants to make a Fantastic Four movie in his universe. I will license those rights out, and we will talk to each other so that we are not stepping on each other's toes when we develop these two series.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's what's happening with Spider-Man.
It's happening with Spider-Man. It's going to happen with Wolverine.
Like Marvel doesn't own
It's going to
Spider-Man
happen with
yet,
X-Men. It's going to.
Film rights.
My second question is so we've established that because that's really interesting to me. I never really thought about that the business game of just fucking your competitor until they just can't until it's just unsalvageable, which is really quite
and
clever.
then buying the rights back.
Yeah, exactly. At its lowest market.
It's happening for Sony. So
so that's actually really clever. The second thing, because I'm always curious, like just on that level, like is there like who's really who's like I'm all about Mr. Fantastic.
I love Reed
That's my
Richards.
fucking dude. Now I always look at the Fantastic Four and I'm like, the name itself is very reminiscent of a different time. But the characters are cool, I guess. I just don't understand like why they keep going back to this well. My second question is, am I the only one that thinks that this Fantastic Four movie is just not going to do well? Because or is it just going to?
It's a big question. This is the big
I
question.
don't think it's going to do well.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I think people expect this one not to do well because it is Fox, which right now is seen as the. I mean, there's really only three universes, I guess, with DC, but Fox is kind of the last place one overall, I would say. But they have X-Men, which is huge, and people right now like X-Men more than they ever have. They are in a good place with all that stuff. They are not in a good
They were
place.
able to bring it back with Days of Future
They brought
Past.
it, well, even with
They were in a
First
bad
Class.
place with First Class. I'm sorry, you're right. I
Yeah,
keep forgetting
they brought
about
it back First Class. They brought it back
Class.
with Days of Future Past. They look like they're in a good place. Deadpool looks awesome. All this stuff looks great. But so far, they haven't been able to have any other series that is an X-Men work. So, in Fantastic Four, this... I don't know.
No, it's also worth noting,
everything you're
though.
saying is right. It's like Fantastic Four is not that marquee thing that everybody's like waiting for and wanting, but neither was Iron Man or Thor.
Sure, and that's what I'm trying to say. That's why everything it seems like it's very unpredictable. Because I think with Fantastic Four is because I think Nick brought it up when we were talking about the movies. We had our argument on the show about the movies and all these kinds of things. Is I'm most curious about how Fantastic Four does to see if they just shit can that second Fantastic Four movie completely.
Exactly.
Or if they filmed it all at the same time, So,
No.
No, that would have been a new.
Is there even a second one announced?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was on that docket we went through, and that was my question too. Of like, yeah, if this one underperforms, do you really do that? But that's Fox having to either bite down and we're going to get through this, or fuck, let's talk to Marvel. What do we do with these guys?
I hope it performs, and I hope it performs because when movie studios like Fox look at their lineup for the next few years, they need to be able to account for the fact that this movie is going to make its money back, so they can take risks with things like a rated R Deadpool movie.
we saw that with the Superman documentary.
What's that?
We saw that with the Superman documentary. They talked about how
that's
they
what
ate
killed
shit on all these
Superman.
movies, and that's why Superman ultimately didn't come out.
That's unfortunate. And right now, like
good point.
I'm really proud of Fox, and I'm really looking forward to the fact that they're actually trying to pioneer the rated R superhero film, which is really cool. Like when
They
you
gotta
get
do
that,
something different.
when you get that sort of experience, I can't remember 300. I'm pretty sure 300 was rated. Yeah, 300 had to be rated R because there was nudity and a ton of violence in it. But like that movie specific. Well, I was like the violence.
Wait,
was
right, titties and blood.
Well, the violence they can get around by like shading the blood a different color. But I forgot that Lena Headey got incredibly nude in that film.
Incredibly nude.
Yeah, it was a fantastic scene.
My favorite type of nude.
But movies like that, experiences like that, right, with Sin City, things like that, where you're like, I'm getting a comic book, a graphic novel experience. Let's stop calling it a comic book movie. This is more of a graphic novel experience. That is where I think the future of that genre can go.
Well, bringing it back to your topic of why DC animated done so well, why DC animated does so well, why they've struggled in the movies, and why Marvel's able to succeed, I think, is the fact that I think DC animated is the most DC stuff they do in terms of something outside of comics.
You're just constantly developing. Is that what you think?
Those are the creators who get to step over and let's take one of our best series ever and make it into a thing. Whereas with a movie, it's like, all right, Zack Snyder you sit down and it's 3 revisions and this producer owns this. So all these different people get in there and toy with it and muck around with it when it should just be, all right, Jeff Johns, what do you want to make? And I say that he had a hand in Green Lantern, of course. So
well, yeah, but Green Lantern had a lot of hands.
That is
the
in
problem
that.
Is when the animated movies. I don't know how much they cost cost to make, but they're probably in the tens of millions, low tens of millions. I don't think they cost that much. But then you're talking about Green Lantern or a movie like Batman v Superman, where you're talking upwards of 150 to $200 million dollars. Yeah, there's a lot of people that start to get a little anxious when you start spending that much money, and of course then they want to dip their hands in and muddle the pond up a little bit. But then why not just take a risk and bring in a story consultant like any of these guys that are writing
you
these
would know
amazing
better
runs?
than I, but I would imagine. And first off, I think they're doing that now. But the reason things have been fucked up for the longest time, and again, you know better, it's just Hollywood bullshit. No,
Yeah.
I think
Well-
Marvel seems to be the thing that are like, all right, come in and tell us how do we make these heroes into these movies?
But
Great,
see-
awesome, and then X-Men, X3, fuck you. McGee's got a great idea. He's gonna go out and do it. You know what I mean? Like
Well,
that.
poor McGee that wasn't McGee, it was Brett Ratner, I think.
Oh, sorry, my
Had to
bad.
step
I
in
hate
that.
McGee because he was attached to a Superman movie that never happened. So I have a different reason to hate
A lot
him.
of people have been attached to that Superman movie.
I know.
No, but I mean that's the thing. I think hopefully they're learning from that. And again, my knowledge base for this is a little bit off because I don't really follow who's writing the actual comic books and the movies.
Sure.
So maybe they are very well starting to bring in story consultants. But that was the power of the Avengers, right? Is they brought in Joss Whedon, who had written comics, who had come from that world and developed specifically some of those
And
characters.
I think you see DC doing that now in terms of who they're bringing in and consulting and how they're making those happen.
Who should be the guy? Who's the best writer of Batman?
Jeff Johns.
Jeff Johns.
Yeah. Well, no, it's Scott Snyder for Batman. Jeff
think so?
Johns overall. But yeah, and I don't know. I don't think Scott Snyder's being consultant for the movie right now or anything. But like that, I mean, if you wanted a Batman tale, I'd go to Scott Snyder.
You'd
for
think Zach would just talk to his brother.
sure.
There's another director that they could have used.
Chris Nolan.
Oh, you mean the Godfather of the picture?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is like we're talking about.
going back down this hole.
No, I don't want to go back down this hole, but I will say because like the overwhelming success of Marvel has eclipsed in terms of volume has eclipsed the fact that I still think that those movies are way better. So it's and I think that from the movies I've seen, from the Marvel movies I've seen, I enjoyed them.
Yeah.
But they're different. So I just think that I want to say that I think DC has found their success. My thing is that I think they found their success very early, and it can be very perilous their future. That's the one thing I'm most excited about. Because there's such a set definition now of success for them.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's gonna be really interesting. That's what I'm gonna be. I'm going to the fucking Batman versus Superman when it comes out with that exactly in my mind. So it's I'm not going to be the only one.
You're going to see make no mistake. There's no way Batman v Superman tanks. No way. That movie makes.
I'm not saying that at all.
$1
I'm not saying that at all. I'm
for-
saying, of course,
for
it's going to do
Warner.
well. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is in
Right.
terms of quality and the cadence of that movie
Yes.
and everything about it, it's going to be in everyone's mind.
And to your point, we're all going to see it. It's going to do incredibly well. The question is, what happens after that? What happens when everyone walks out of that theater with a general, not disdain, I guess. What's the word I'm looking for? Malaise, right? They walk out and they're just like, meh. You know?
I think that's
But you
probably
walked
gonna
out of
be the
Batman
solution.
Begins and you were like, all right, I need to see another one of those. That was actually pretty unique. So I mean that will be the question because they're are they focusing on the story? And I guess that's the nature of my point is what can DC do to focus more on the story, less on the visual, more on that story craft. Whereas I think Zack Snyder is doing that, but somewhere along the lines they just haven't hit it yet. Like Man of Steel just didn't quite hit it. It had a lot of great elements in it.
Yeah.
If you think about the story of that film, I thought it was really cool. It's a cool sci-fi take. I mean, it's a cool sci-fi film. It's great.
Yeah.
I liked it. I love the beginning. I love the setup. They went wrong somewhere in the middle, but can they get that back? I don't think it was that far. I don't think they diverged that far from where they needed to be with it.
And see, here's the problem. Here's the problem with we're to wrap all this up. Is the problem of what you're saying is how would you have felt about Man of Steel if it was an animated film? You just watched a tale last night where Superman was a migrant farm worker who said "Adios mios" or whatever, and it's like I'm saying you expect the comics to do whatever the fuck they want, but
Right.
when we come to a motion picture, we expect something, and we didn't get it with Man of Steel. And this is what my argument this movie continues to be is that when my expectations were not met, when I took time off and I came back a year later and watched it, I was like, you know what, this was good. It's
It was
setting up
good.
a universe in
It
a
was.
different way. So the malaise and stuff again, I think. If everything goes right for them, Suicide Squad will be the one where it's like, oh, this is the universe. This isn't just Zack Snyder.
I got you.
You know
I
what I
got
mean?
you,
You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? And I feel like that takes so much time to build that what's been against DC so far is the fact they have one movie out there where everyone can turn and go, well, Zack Snyder can't make a fucking Superman film, clearly. Maybe he's making his Superman film just like
Right.
these animated series films are this. I mean, Superman Doomsday, I remember watching and I'm like, okay, oh, cool. Superman and Lois are fucking. That's a great. I'm glad they're doing that. I'm glad they're not
Me too.
Wait, whoa. Superman's fucking Lois, and Lois doesn't know he's Clark? What the fuck? You know what I mean? And then, but it was
hot.
like, all right, whatever. This is your story. Go ahead and do it.
Right.
And meanwhile, Superman Returns, he has an illegitimate child with Lois, and I was like, what the fucking resolve this? Resolve it now.
Yeah, that was we can dive into that Superman Returns at a later date. But I'm with you. I went back and watched Man of Steel again on the plane. We were coming back from where were we coming back?
We've
from?
had this conversation a million times.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that's
it is.
animated versus motion picture is a different thing.
It is. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
And I'm glad. I think DC
Superman.
succeeds because they let creators who go out do these animated films and tell whatever tale they want. Like I always talk about Batman Assault on Arkham, right, where they just blow a dude's head off in the very beginning. You're like, all right, awesome. You know what I mean? And now they've announced Killing Joke, and it's like my one knock with DC animated films is it's hard for me usually to get excited for them. Like
you've already read the story.
I already know everything's going to happen. Usually, not with Gods and Monsters and even Assault on Arkham. Those were bad examples. But like the other ones, right, where they're retelling Superman, Brainiac, or Doomsday even.
But it's a cool example, right? Because you said you read the prequel.
Yeah.
So that was a fun experience.
That was a good way to lead in.
I didn't even know there was a prequel. I assumed there was actually.
Yeah,
I think I saw it on the DC Comics
much
app.
of the digital firsts.
Right.
I highly recommend it. It was fun.
Cool.
Right on the plane.
Right on.
Nick.
Yes.
You had a good topic, and I liked it, of course, because it was about
you.
comic books. Do you know who sponsored it?
I do not.
Loot Crate.
Nice. Noise.
Would you
as they say.
classify yourself as a geek, gamer, or pop culture nerd?
I would.
Then Loot Crate is the subscription box for you. For less than $20 a month, you get 6 to 8 items of gamer and pop culture licensed gear, apparel, collectibles, unique one-of-a-kind items, and more. Make sure you head to lootcrate.com/kindafunny and enter the code kindafunny to save $3 on any new subscription. Here's where it comes full circle on your topic.
Okay.
This month, Loot Crate is cowering in fear for the return of villains. That was good. We practiced this. Whether they're terrifying or tragic, something about bad guys and gals is just plain fun. Probably the snazzy outfits, army of henchmen, and totally relatable. Treat yourself to some sweet loot attitude.
Nice.
Good
read.
Good read.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us as we celebrate our darker side with the epic items from Marvel, an exclusive DC figure that I will take out of the box, a unique wearable that we've never put in a crate before, and more. So you have until 19th at 9 p.m. Pacific time to subscribe and receive this month's Loot Crate. When the cutoff happens, it's over and you can't get it again. So go to lootcrate.com/kindafunny and enter the code kindafunny to save $3 on your new subscription today. Thank you, Loot Crate, as always.
Thanks, Luke. Great.